Hi and welcome to our next section, Troubleshooting, Error Handling and Tuning. In this section, we will talk about how to analyze bugs or unexpected behavior, will improve the overall error handling, and see how we can improve the design and the performance. But first, troubleshooting and error handling. In this video, we are going to take a look into how we can get more insights about the internals of our application. While developing, we will use typical tools and debugging and logging. In the second part, we will then get into the position to see where we can improve the error handling or having a better control and be able to give a better and fast feedback to the user. Therefore, we will add some appropriate checks and errors on the server side, and on the client side, of course, we will then be able to use that information to give some maybe more understandable error message to the user. But first, let's start with troubleshooting. We already saw some tools, we used them in the browser. For instance, there are the Apollo Dev tools, so we can have a look into the cache. And to inspect the GraphQL operations, there's this GraphQL network. And of course, we can also see how our subscriptions work and can also do some slow down or simulate a bad network on the network tab. And of course, there are the developer's best friends, the console log, and the debugger, of course. And optionally, we could also add a specific Apollo link, which adds some extra logging. But first, let's do some troubleshooting. I prepared already something, so our application doesn't work as usual. And let's see what's going wrong here. So first, I think I would like to remove the section 5, which is duplicated, and I press the delete function. Wow, but it doesn't work. What can we do? At this point, of course, the easiest thing is to jump into the console or to open the console, and here we already get some error message. And that is something we can have a look into that in a second, but first let me also open the GraphQL console here. And I trigger it again, and we don't have any connection somehow. Also, when we get to the network tab here, of course, we see, hey, somehow our fetching here, the connection to the server is somehow broken. We don't get any connection. So I think that brings us to the point where I would like to check if the server is up and running. And when I'm switching back to our IDE, where I have this terminal where I started our server, I see the server was down and I have to restart it, of course. So now it's up and running again. And switching back, we should see in a second that the connection should be established again. That's right. And if I now trigger the button again, so this was working. We get here no further error. And in the next step, of course, I would like to see if the GraphQL operation here worked as expected. And you see again here the details of our delete list mutation. And of course, interesting is the response here. So we already see there's the errors field in this message from the server, which was not empty. And this seems to be more complicated problem on the server side. It means that we don't get any connection from our GraphQL server to the database. And that was of course something I was expecting because I stopped the GraphQL database server. Let's start it again, and then this should also be gone. So here I just have to start the Docker container again. It will be there in a second. Okay, it's up and running. So I think when we now do the trigger again here, we get the delete without any error here, so we don't find any error from the server side. But somehow it didn't work at all, even while here we don't get any server error. Something is still broken. And after clearing the console and switching back to the network, here we might get the specific error. When I filter for the web tokens here, I see that there is nothing coming back. And when I'm trying to delete this again, I would have a different problem, of course, but at the end here we don't see any proper communication via WebSockets. That might be just because we restarted the server. At the end, I would say we have to restart the client here. And of course, the refreshed board does not have this second section 5, but I can add one, and at the end now I should get the proper information, correct information here. So now after the first acknowledge here, you see the first 2 events sent from the server. Of course, the first is a created event on the list subscription here. So the creating of the section 5 list here worked. And let me clear that again. And now while this will now work, everything is perfect. Let's try out something additionally. So I switch to a second tab, and here I can now trigger the logout mutation. And that will of course lead to some different problems. I'm switching back to the board where I'm still logged in. And now if I try to add a new list, for instance, that won't work at all. And that will be something I won't see here. So I should switch over to the GraphQL. So now I will try to add a new list again. And of course this won't work. But we don't get any proper feedback for the user. But just looking here into the GraphQL operation, this gives us the not authorized information in the response here. And of course I think we have console log, so at least we see that this does not work. And we can also debug or look into that source code for that. And as you can see here, this is our cool board where we have this add list mutation here. So at least we get the output on the console log, but that. So finally we can see that we have this error, that we have at least error handling by logging that information to the console log here after triggering the mutation. But that is not the sufficient error handling which we wanna have. Of course we will extend this in the next part of this video, but at least now we also found how we can get some information with the usual tools. And we didn't use debugging. We could add here breakpoints additionally if something is completely weird, for instance. And I just want to switch again to the Apollo DevTools, which we had a look into that in previous sections. So we just have here all the insights into our cache, for instance the logged in user here. And of course when we look into one of the boards here, we have the boards with the special lists and so on. And here this is a great place to look into when you have some weird update errors. It helped me a lot when I found out that the cache was updated, but somehow while the response, for instance, of a mutation doesn't match exactly what I specified in the query, that was not updating the UI. So that helped me here to look into that and finding such issues. So we saw the Apollo DevTools. We also found the network tab here. The console of course helps also, and in the GraphQL you find also important information. Now let's see how we can improve the situation here with a better feedback for the user. So while these were still tools we used on the client side, I also want to show you and to repeat what we used on our server. Therefore we have here this nice tool so that we can fire up this server in the debug mode. Now I can start with yarn debug. It starts up regularly but additionally has this possibility to connect. Now I can just use specific configuration I used before. So there is this debugging tool built into the IDE, and when I'm opening also a source code where I want to set the breakpoint, for instance, when I'm interested in the authentication here, That works pretty easy, and I think we did that already, so I will just move on quickly. So when I'm now in my client starting to send a request, and as I have here my breakpoint, so it automatically stops here and gives me some details so I can, for instance, find some local variables. So that is of course pretty easy to use in the IDE and helps to find any issues which would normally be difficult. Let's figure out how we can improve our error handling. So therefore, I start on the server side, because we at that point used just to throw this exception or this authentication error here. And of course, that's pretty fine, but it leads to something which will then be used on the client side, and that is normally not machine readable. But fortunately, there's some library out there which helps here, because this auth error is defined above here based on using the create error of the Apollo errors library, and it was meant to enhance or extend the information which will be sent when error occurs, because transparently will send to the client, and we can add this not authorized error constant as a name or as a tag or something, and that will be then used in the client side, which we will see in a second. But first here, just basically creating this error, and then I can throw this error in the error case here and adding this additional message if I want to, but we additionally have to use specific formatter. So therefore I have to switch to where we start our GraphQL yoga server, and additionally we can add these options which can then be used to specify our format error function here, and this is a specific one which comes with the Apollo error library. Let us switch to the client side now. So let me switch to our client, and this is a typical page we have. So now I have the possibility to handle the error message differently. I'm opening this page here, and when I'm logging out, I typically get an authentication error. So this will be sent to the client, and now by getting this specific error message, I can now send the user this message, and additionally I could also add a specific link here for him to log in again. After login, we get back, and so on. How is this working? First, let's look into the transferred error message which we will get from the server. Therefore, let's look here into our GraphQL tab, and I'm sending a logout message. So after the logout was sent, this page was re-rendered and this query started here. So the query for the current user was sent, and the response gives here this error. And in this error, or in this list of errors, it is typically an array. So we now get the message here, the not authorized message. And what's new is the name here. So based on this specific name here, I can do some further things, because the not authorized message would be something the user might understand, but for the UI we can't handle properly this type or any of these messages, and therefore we now use the not authorized name here. And based on this name, I can now do specific error handling, and I show you that in the page. So now when I'm switching back to our UI, I had to do some extensions here, because first, while sending this error messages, I would need to have a place where I can analyze the error and react on this error. So therefore, I introduced a new component. This is the general error handler here. So I can use this just on some different pages, and only in the error case it shows the specific message you already saw. So additionally I need this network status, because that's the interesting part here. I get it back from using this create network status notifier. So what is this network status notifier? This is something we get here from an additional library which is called React Apollo Network Status, and it's quite cool because it is just like any other link. So it's hooked into the communication to the server, and it then gets the information from the GraphQL operation and its state. It creates this link and the network status notifier, which is a React component. We will just rename here in this line the link to the specific name so that we can then use it by concatenating it with our existing link. So in that case now we have this connection of the link to the notifier, and let me just show you where we use it. So first, a rough overview of this component. So it's basically a React component which then renders this React status notifier, which has here render props. So in the case it might render something, we get a new error object here and can analyze it, and then in the error case, for instance here, render a message. Or if there is now error, then we just return false, which is the case when we would just be in a loading state. But as you already saw, there are different cases which we can handle differently. So first, the error object, what we already saw, which was sent by the server, and we saw it in the GraphQL tab in the browser. It contains a GraphQL error and a network error and so on. And here in this case first, I'm interested in these new GraphQL errors. And so I will first look through the list of errors to find this not authorized error. And if I find that, I can just render this message here, where I additionally put the login link so that the user can quite comfortably log into the application again. And in any other case, like here, where I don't know what this error is based on, I can just print the message. So any other GraphQL operation might fail, and then we just send here the list of errors. Additionally, I also found out when I got no connection to our GraphQL server, then I would get a network error, and so that can be printed like this. In any other case, I would just handle our problem by sending it to the console and giving the hint that more details here can be found in the console. So let's check out how this works now. I would say this is a quite easy case. We just are not authenticated, so let's log in again. And so as you might remember, we didn't implement any subscriptions here on the boards page. So when I'm opening this page in another tab, it won't be updated. So after deleting this board now, when I'm going to the second page where I didn't re-render it, I still have here the test board, and when I'm deleting that, of course, it failed, because that doesn't exist anymore. So confusingly, we have two error messages. So the first message here above is the new general error handler, and the second I had to implement specifically on the boards page, and at that point it was easy to implement, but at that point I have it everywhere, and so that might be an alternative. But when you want to have a general error handling, then that's not so easy. So just to have a short discussion about that, This is our new list of boards page. I created it with the new Apollo 2.1 query components. They're making a lot of use of the render props, and additionally it's quite comfortable here to use, for instance here, the error handling for rendering it automatically here on this place. But as you can see, this is the error case for the query, and of course we could also have for each mutation once we have it here, and additionally we also have here some error handling, and additionally we also had to implement it here, which was basically just the simplest solution, getting some error here from the mutation, and then if it exists we just present it in the form, this dialog or modal pop-up. But that was some kind of basic here, and we didn't generalize it. But at the end now, so when I'm going back here, I'm on the boards page, which you see here. By just adding the general error handler here, I have this user feedback automatically implemented. So that is something I also have it here on the board, and I think we should just check it out to get an impression how this works, and at the end we see how nice we can work with that. So for instance, if you also think we have here too many sections 5, I delete one, and now in this case it doesn't work properly because I disabled subscriptions completely. So in the meantime, the section 5 and another one, they are both deleted. And so when I'm now deleting this once again, of course it fails because that doesn't exist anymore in the database, I get this error message here without any further effort, and I don't have to add any additional handler, because there was, for instance, this error handler and it didn't work at all. Here we get this console error, and if you check out, it was on a cool page here. This is one of the mutations which we implemented on our board, and for deleting this card list, it triggers the GraphQL operation, and while we get this promise back here, we will get notified here asynchronously and had this catch block only here without any link to our UI. And so now that is something which we can actually handle quite elegantly by just having this general hook here. And while we don't use any of this information here, we could theoretically also delete it. There are further locations where we also didn't do much without this. So as you can see, this solution now is quite elegant, and it also saves us some effort because we just have to place it in one location and reuse it. So we can also remove some parts of our code. So finally we also have less code needed and have a nice place for extending it. We can, for instance, do some more logic, because maybe if you think the message here is not quite readable for the user, we can also handle additional cases here and have it implemented only on one place. Finally, I just want to show you what happens when the server is not available. That would be normally something which you would have to handle in every case, but now we have it on a general place, so I can just trigger the mutation or here, and we just have the error handler here. It's quite basic or simple, and we don't do much, but at least we get the information and the user sees what the problem is. So also here or also here, I like this. Here we have the second error message again. So this is also something I will have to delete. I can do this in the meantime, so you will find the changes then later in the source code.